mixed motives. If you're throwing something that you love, we're throwing a baby shower for our friend who was infertile and having a baby, and this is a gift of God in our midst, and everybody wants to be there. And that's like a labor of love, and you throw yourself into it, right? So thinking in terms of the organization always moves toward the source of energy. So wherever that is and how we manage that. And one of the things, and what's great is always put that then with number 9, outcome should be useful. So this goes back to the piece that, this is the part that for the tapes, I hope Dennis hears, that the point about all this conversation about being positive isn't just to be positive and to not look at the things we're concerned about. It's to say we really believe that the way we address those things we're concerned about, the useful solutions, the way we'll get to that land that now has a wall between us, isn't focusing our energy on the wall, it's focusing on that land. And it might be around, it might be under, it might be over, it might be that God shows up and teleports us, it might be that the wall falls down in an earthquake, we don't know, but we're going into the land. and we're going to try to find our way to get into the land more than we're going to focus on this wall that's right there in front of us. And then part of that is backing up and saying, the goal is we have to be useful. I'm very practical. I love this. I got this part that Matthew said he liked the Presbyterian heritage because it had a really practical focus for raising our kids. I want there to be a different quality of life. It has to be useful. One of the illustrations I've often used is we talk about anxiety. People often say, it's very bad to have stress and anxiety. If you really want to calm down, you'll do better in life. That's true. But there's a certain amount of stress that actually makes stuff happen. Right? The analogy uses a crock pot. You take a bunch of hard vegetables and some raw meat, throw it all in the crock pot. If you monitor the heat appropriately over enough time, you get a meal. If it's too low, it still stays hard vegetables and meat. It's inedible. If it's too high, it scorches and burns and it's wasted. So a ton of it is monitoring that heat. It's heat over a right amount of time that is monitored and measured perfectly that creates the stew. And so a ton of what leadership has to do is monitor that energy, monitor that heat, that anxiety, use the urgency that's necessary to move people forward, but at the same time, make sure that you're not spiking on the wrong things. And what's fascinating about it is that the whole point about calming down is when it starts to spike, is so you can make the right decision. You can make the right decision. That's the whole point of calming down. We don't make good decisions when we're anxious. When we're panicked, when we're, okay, we've got to, I sat in more session meetings where we've got to decide this tonight. As soon as someone bangs the table, usually at that moment,
it's a sign.
Our discernment is going to go right out this window. Harry Truman was said that whenever anybody asked him to make a decision, the first question he asked was, how long do I have to make it? If I got 3 weeks to make it, I'll make it in 3 weeks. If I got to make it tonight, I'll make it tonight. But very often because we get so anxious, we're saying we're going to decide this today, and what we do is we end up scorching something. Okay, here's how we're going to solve this problem. We're going to throw ourselves into it rather than thinking through these larger pieces. Last one, we'll take a little break. The last piece here is, and what I want you to do is we'll take a break and we'll come back and I'll answer questions so we can try to fill in this a little more. All steps are collaborative. The point about appreciative inquiry is you need everybody's story in the room. In the past, what churches have said and organizations have said is, okay, Steve, tell us your dream. What's your vision? Tell us your story. Have you noticed how Steve's stories are really different than everybody else's? I mean, they're really cool stories, but his story, Steve's the only one who really dug at the worship leader thing. The rest of you guys are not. Steve's stuff is really different. Steve talks about flexibility and experimentation, and yes, why not? Some of that ties into, but it's interesting. Steve's stories are different. He's got a different angle as the pastor, and in the past, leadership has always been, well, whatever the pastor wants. His story, his narrative, his vision works, and then we all decide whether we're in it or not. Steve then becomes a salesperson. Can he sell his vision to the church? And you'll probably even have people say that, Steve, we need to hear your vision. Steve, what is it that you want from us? And what it is it's like it's a poll. Okay, do we want? Have you ever noticed how we do elections that way? Okay, President Obama, what is your vision for America? Okay, John McCain, what's your vision for America? What's interesting is America doesn't have one person setting a vision. It's a huge, messy collaborative that's going to take somebody to be able to pull together and say, this is an American vision. So I think it's And that's part of the part to realize is that, and the appreciative inquiry says, for it to move anywhere, everything has to be collaborative. You need as many voices in the room so that you can hear these themes over and over and over and over and over again. Because if not, someone who's got a big voice will lead it in the direction they want. Mm-hmm. And that could be a big anxious voice, you know? Families will not be here, or if I'm paying the bills, it could be a big giver, it could be Steve's. Oh my, we have to do this or we'll lose Steve. What we want is a real, much more collaborative voice. As a pastor, I always have to ask myself these questions. Where is this my thing or our thing? I'm very green. I would be very environmentally sensitive. I hate our styrofoam cups, and I will build this building to be more like St. Mark. But I couldn't convince anybody, when you put this on the table, if we were doing this around here, we'd be like, okay, let's go around the room. What's your dream? What's your value? I like that. I care about the environment. And it'd been crickets. Nobody else would care in this church. This is an old military conservative church. They're, okay, yeah, we can get rid of styrofoam cups. What's that cost? No, we're keeping the styrofoam, What I realized is I can raise that as my concern, but until other people own that voice with me, I don't lead it as a church, as a pastor. I don't know. I feel disappointed by it personally, but it's not my agenda. But when I said Hispanic ministry, and no one jumped to the cry, I just kept waiting until after 10 years, finally Hispanic ministry did jump to the cry. And now we have Hispanic ministry. Once it became collaborative, it moved. Appreciative inquiry says there's a system at work. That if we focus on the positive and we work together to bring those things through together, that there is something happening in our midst that we discern together through these common themes, that those themes of life-giving forces that show up in our stories begin to generate images for a future. Those positive inquiry forces, those stories that appear and those themes begin to give us images. And those images lead us then to innovative steps. And all we're going to do today is get basically as far as like this. The point is to understand the process of how inquiry through these themes leads to that. I want to take a little break and we'll come back. Stretch or whatever. Bathrooms are down the hall. It's beautiful outside.